Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our worries and stepping into the quiet, threadbare world of Edo-Era Japan, not through samurai sword fights or grand poetry, but through the soft creak of worn sandal straps and the whisper of straw soles on dirt paths. You're standing at dawn in a narrow Kyoto alley, where the scent of steamed rice still lingers and the air hums faintly with the waking buzz of cicadas. A small wooden sign, dangling from a crooked beam, reads simply, "Show us." That's right, with the long and everything. The shop owner, a hunched man with more years than toes, slides open the paper door, yawns, and sets out his wares ziri, waraji, and geta. Nothing flashy, nothing fancy. Just sandals. You're about to discover how these humble foot wrappings stitch together 1,000 tiny stories. Stories of diplomacy, rebellion, romance, and rice straw. You probably won't survive this if you're looking for explosions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You watch him thread a narrow reed through the heel of a straw sandal, his fingers moving like a monk's at prayer. He doesn't look up, but you sense he knows you're there. Behind him, hundreds of tiny shoes hang like wind chimes from rafters, gently swaying as he moves. None are labeled, but each has a story, he insists. One belonged to a temple courier who outran a flood. Another was made from bark peeled during a comet sighting. Each sandal, in his eyes, is a small treaty between wearer and road, between silence and sound. He tells you that, in the 1700s, Kyoto's shoemakers lived in perpetual half-bow. Not metaphorically. Customers ranged from rice merchants to retired warriors, and showing humility with every sale was practically law. To say the industry was low status would be generous. They weren't outcasts. But let's just say if there was a caste between tax collector and temple rat catcher, that's where cobblers landed. And yet, despite, or maybe because of that status, they were uniquely positioned. They heard everything, and they repeated nothing. He hands you a pair of zirai. They're simple woven rice straw with a hemp thong. Lightweight, yes, but durable. You slip them on, and it's oddly grounding. You feel the ground, its unevenness, its intention. These aren't just shoes, they're negotiators. And you're walking into a time when diplomacy didn't always happen in tea houses or under cherry blossoms. Sometimes it happened while adjusting a sandal strap in the mud. The streets outside are already heating up. You walk past other cobblers, each with their own peculiar rituals. One sings softly to each pair before tying the final knot. Another blesses his creations with a quick puff of incense. And while it may look quaint now, back then, a misaligned thong could cause more than a blister. It could mean a lost message, a misunderstood gesture, or a very annoyed feudal lord. Historians still argue whether the shoemakers truly understood their role in the broader political ecosystem, or if they were just very good at pretending not to. Either way, they were there unnoticed, in every city, every inn, every whispered corridor. They listened as traders grumbled, as samurai recounted travels, as monks discussed celestial calendars and crop failures. They said little, they remembered much. You pass by a child trying on a pair of miniature geta. The little blocks clack unevenly on the cobblestones as she balances, arms wide. Her mother watches, half amused, half worried she'll topple. And maybe that's the perfect metaphor for this whole era of society, balancing delicately on tiny wooden stilts, trying not to fall, trying to make it look easy. Nearby, a younger cobbler argues with a customer about foot size. The customer insists his feet are average. The cobbler diplomatically disagrees. With measuring string, you learn that insultingly underestimating a man's foot width was once a passive-aggressive way to suggest he lacked standing. In more ways than one. These were the micro-diplomacies that made Edo's society tick. Just then, your sandal loosens, and the old shoemaker appears at your side without a sound. He kneels, tightens the thong, and whispers, "This pair once walked to Edo and back. Twice. You thank him." He bows slightly, returns to his shop. You walk on. A soft rain begins, barely more than mist. The Z squeak gently but hold firm. It's funny how much trust you've placed in a few strands of rice straw, but then again, Japan did too for centuries. Her word count 1, Yo 78 awaiting, Sianti ni you, Bintunan nane Katiani ChatGPT ananai. Section 2. The rain doesn't stop. It just hangs in the air, soft and stubborn, turning the roads into slow, moving ribbons of mud. Your straw sandals squish quietly with each step, but they're doing their job, keeping your feet just dry enough to remain humble. As you follow the slow curve of the alley toward the market quarter, you begin to notice the sheer abundance of one humble, overlooked material rice straw. It's everywhere. Not just under your feet, but packed between wooden beams, looped around bundles, stuffed in cracks, rolled into makeshift brooms and sandals, and even wound into decorative tassels hanging from doorways like sleepy sentinels. Back in the Edo period, rice wasn't just food. It was currency, status, tax base, and emotional support staple. But while polished rice filled bellies and books, it was the leftover husks and straw that built the quiet infrastructure of daily life. And for shoemakers, rice straw wasn't just abundant, it was everything. Zuri and waraji were usually made from tightly braided rice straw, sometimes layered with hemp for strength, or dyed using persimmon tannins to resist rot. Waraji were the workhorses of the era, basic, flat, and quick to make. Ziri were slightly fancier, often worn indoors or at formal events, and sometimes laced with silk thread if the wearer had coin to spare. You duck into a small shop whose shelves overflow with raw materials. Straw bundles hang like sleepy chandeliers. The shopkeeper, a wary woman in her 60s, gives you a look that suggests she doesn't suffer fools or modern insoles. She waves you over and wordlessly hands you a strand of rice straw. It's dry, brittle, and surprisingly light. No twist. She says, her voice a low gravel. You do your best, it splits. She sighs. You try again, slower this time. The straw bends, groans, and begins to twist into a firm chord. She nods finally. Good, strong. No squeak. Turns out, making a good sandal isn't just about materials. It's about listening. If a sandal squeaks, it's considered embarrassing. No one wants their arrival to be announced by the sound of a nervous duck. In fact, there was a saying, "A quiet soul walks with purpose." Shoemakers would often spend as much time tweaking the thong's tension as they would braiding the sole itself. And if the customer had important errands, say, delivering a letter to a provincial governor or wooing someone's daughter, the shoemaker might add a dash of plum bark or licorice root between the weaves, not for scent, but as a charm. Quiet shoes, lucky day. There's an old scroll pinned to the wall. Faded ink drawings of various sandal types, each annotated with poetic names like Cloud Step, Whispered Promise, and Retired Hawk. One particularly odd-looking one features an exaggerated curve and extra side straps. The shopkeeper taps it and snorts. Diplomatic edition, she says. You raise an eyebrow. She explains this model was supposedly commissioned by a minor court official who needed to walk long distances without appearing too pedestrian. Literally. The extra straps, symbolic of layered responsibility. The curve, a subtle nod to rank. Historians still argue whether the design was genuinely accepted by the upper courts or just a cobbler's clever way to mock bureaucracy. Outside, you watch a boy carrying a bundle of raw straw across his shoulders, barefoot, leaving ghost prints in the damp clay. He's likely on his way to his family's weaving hut. Entire families worked in these micro-industries, often sleeping beside their wares. The father would weave, the mother would trim and tie, the children would prepare the straw. It was a generational loop, looping like the sandals themselves. Rice straw was biodegradable, sure, But its lifespan wasn't as short as you'd think. A well-made pair of waraji could last several weeks of heavy use, longer if the roads were dry, and when they finally fell apart, they were burned, composted, or in some rural areas, hung from trees to ward off evil spirits. That last bit isn't even superstition. It's practicality disguised as folklore. Birds would pick the old straw for nests, inadvertently spreading the cobbler's handiwork across the countryside. You pass a roadside rest stop, where travelers sit under a leaky awning, quietly mending their own sandals. One man trims a frayed edge with a bamboo knife. Another tightens the heel thong with a hairpin. Sandal maintenance was everyone's job. There were even tiny travel kits sold by vendors. Little more than twine, a bit of resin, and instructions etched into thin wooden tablets. The DIY spirit of the era was real, mostly because no one wanted to pay double at the next town over. And of course, rice straw wasn't just for shoes. You notice a nearby vendor selling sleep sandals. Extra, soft soles padded with mulberry fiber and used solely within bedrooms. They were rarely worn outdoors, not because of ritual, but because they disintegrate faster than a snowflake in a bathhouse. One of them looks suspiciously like a flop made for clouds. By now, your ziri have molded slightly to your feet. They make a soft tap on the stone path, a syncopated metronome that joins the rhythm of this quiet city. You realize that every person you pass is in their own world, carrying their own secrets and errands, and nearly all of them are wearing some version of straw-bound sandals. Silent, worn, anonymous. It's as if the entire city has agreed to whisper its way through history. Herward County 1063, awaiting, Siotinen. Binan Clintiani ChatGPT Anani. Section 3, you find yourself in a narrow merchant lane, the roofs so close they nearly kiss. Shoemakers here are less spiritual and more business savvy. The signage gets bolder, the sales pitch is louder, the sandals slightly shinnier. A stall to your left brags about its 7-day, Frey guarantee. Another claims their souls have been blessed by 3 separate monks and 1 sake brewer. You sense some quiet inflation in the miracles per inch ratio. But here's where things get interesting. You spot a posted notice, yellowed and rain-streaked, tucked into a wooden bulletin frame. It's dated to the mid-Edo period and lists regulations pertaining to the manufacture, sale, and display of footwear. Sounds dull as dull. But also fascinating in that sleepy, why am I reading this kind of way? Apparently, sandals back then weren't just taxed. They were micromanaged. There were rules about the materials used, the shape of the thong, and, oddly enough, the maximum width of the sole. The shogunate, in its eternal quest to control all aspects of life, had decided that sandals wider than a certain limit were a sign of unnecessary luxury. Yes, your shoes could legally be too extra. So shoemakers got clever. They started adding secret layers underneath the sole, creating what looked like regulation size sandals but with hidden comfort padding, sort of like 18th century orthopedic inserts. Historians still argue whether this counts as tax evasion or just really cozy rebellion. You wander further, stopping at a booth run by a man with spectacular eyebrows and exactly 1 tooth. He offers you a sandal with decorative tassels on the straps. Legal flair. He says proudly. Tassels, it turns out, were a loophole. You couldn't widen the base, but you could hang things off it. Some customers went all in. Bells, silk knots, even miniature haikus carved onto slats. The shogunate cracked down on those too eventually. No joy allowed. And speaking of taxes, did you know shoemakers were once required to provide free footwear to visiting officials? It wasn't called a bribe. It was called a customary expression of respect. Same thing, really. And if the sandals weren't satisfactory, the official might send them back with notes, passive-aggressive, meticulously phrased notes that read like poetry and felt like slaps. One even famously said, "The thong weeps with imbalance." Och, you pause at a low bench where an apprentice is painting soles with a mix of persimmon juice and ash. This makes them more water resistant and gives them a deep reddish hue. He's doing it carefully, muttering under his breath. Not a prayer, but a tax ledger. He's calculating how many pairs he'll need to sell to pay the year's straw tariff. Yes, there was a tariff on straw imports between regions. Because naturally, different provinces had better straw, thicker, more pliable, more fragrant. Straw snobbery was real. In the background, a street performer mimics a daimie, complete with giant sandals the size of small boats. Kids laugh. The adults chuckle knowingly. They all remember the law about excessive sole width, which, though rarely enforced strictly, once got a magistrate publicly reprimanded for wearing get a too wide for his gait. That's right. The man couldn't enter his own estate without turning sideways like a cartoon character. A local artist painted the scene. You glimpse a copy in a nearby window. You stop by a tea stall, sit on a damp mat, and sip weak barley tea. A conversation behind you drifts in. The stall owner's father once got fined for selling mismatched sandals to two different tax inspectors on the same day. Different sole widths, different provinces. The fine? 2 sacks of polished rice and 1 public apology. The punishment was recited aloud, while the cobbler kneeled on a mat of his own defective shoes. It was equal parts tragic and hilarious. A light breeze picks up, ruffling the loose thatch of sandals hanging nearby. You notice something strange. Some are deliberately asymmetrical. The left sole slightly shorter, the right strap pulled tighter. When you ask, the tea seller explains that these are official approach sandals. The idea, slight discomfort, would force the wearer to slow down before meeting a superior. You couldn't barge into a daimie's presence if your right foot was mildly offended. A physical metaphor for deference. Of course, like everything bureaucratic, this got abused. Clever messengers would wear approach sandals all the time to feign importance. Merchants began marketing high station discomfort pairs. There were even forgeries. Sandals made to look uncomfortable, but worn in just enough to let you keep your dignity. The shogunate eventually cracked down. Again, but only after a certain noble tripped down the palace steps in a pair of particularly aggressive humility soles. You finish your tea and rise, your own Ziari quietly loyal beneath you. It's funny how much power can hide in silence, how even the width of a shoe can shift perceptions. The cobblers of the Edo period didn't need swords or speeches. They had straw, string, and rules to quietly bend. A word count 1091 awaiting Siontianu Bien Banaosiani ChatGPT INI Section 4. The tea stall behind you fades into the misty hum of the marketplace, and your path winds uphill toward the grander parts of town. Here, the homes lean more upright, the eaves stretch longer, and even the trees seem more carefully placed. You're entering the domain of protocol. The place where even the sound of your sandals can make or break a moment. And it all starts with knowing when to take them off. In Edo, Japan, shoes were not just footwear. They were social cues. You approach the outer wall of a mid-tier daimie's residence, more guarded than grandiose, but still projecting a stiff sort of dignity. Outside the gate sits a pair of lacquered gate stands. They look like tiny altars, because in a way, they are. This is where visitors remove their shoes before entering. Not just out of politeness, but as part of a system so layered with ritual, it could make a modern etiquette expert weep into their napkin. You slip off your sandals, following the signs. Step left, not center. Face your shoes outward, so you don't seem like you're planning to stay long. Place them symmetrically, unless you want to suggest inner imbalance. And heaven help you if you accidentally point the thong toward the threshold. That's considered not just rude, but practically a spiritual crime. You remember the tale the old cobbler told earlier about a monk who pointed his sandals wrong at a shrine and then lost all his hair overnight. Probably just a cautionary tale. Probably. Inside the residence, the floor is tatami, matted, soft, and whisper quiet. Your feet feel strangely naked, but the silence is intentional. Conversations happen in low tones, footsteps are mere suggestions, and the presence of sandals, or lack thereof, sends all kinds of unspoken signals. Historians still argue whether sandals were left deliberately crooked outside certain chambers as warnings. There's at least one preserved diary entry from a high-ranking lady in waiting who described seeing a pair of traveler's zirai tilted toward the wall. Not an accident. She never explained what it meant. Just left that ominous detail dangling like a thread no one dares pull. You're led by a stoic servant through narrow corridors to a small guest room. He wears indoor only slippers made of woven silk, silent and pristine. Your own feet are beginning to crave the familiarity of your sandals again. It's a subtle anxiety, but it grows. You're not the only one. Guests of this era often brought clean soles. Extra pairs meant to be worn indoors, but swapped discreetly before entering. These weren't for comfort. They were about status. The cleaner your second pair, the more powerful your message. You could say a lot with soft padding and zero heel marks. At the far end of the compound, you're shown a tea house. It's an annex built specifically for the ritualized art of tea making. The floor here is even more delicate. Tightly woven reed mats polished to a soft sheen. You kneel at the entrance, where a line of slippers awaits, all identical. But the real secret lies in the order. The slipper closest to the wall, reserved for the highest guest, the one by the door. The lowest. Step into the wrong one, and you might as well have confessed to tax fraud. During one notable incident in 1762, a merchant from Satsuma supposedly wore the central slippers, reserved for a visiting monk, by accident. He didn't notice. The host did. The tea ceremony proceeded with forced smiles and beautiful bitterness. That same evening, the merchant sandal shipment to Edo mysteriously fell off a boat. Coincidence? Historians still argue. You step outside, where another guest approaches, carefully adjusting their indoor slippers before stepping onto the ingawa, the covered porch. You catch their eyes, and there's a brief flicker of sandal, base camaraderie. They've misstepped before. Everyone has. It's practically a rite of passage. As you exit through the main gate, you spot a servant polishing the gate stands with rice bran paste. She's methodical, turning each shoe slightly as she works. You ask if she's ever made a mistake in placement. She pauses, then grins. Once, a day me tripped, blamed a ghost. Was actually just my left-handedness. You both chuckle. Somewhere, a sandal historian just felt a disturbance in the foot force. Further along the road, you arrive at a small inn where travelers are removing their footwear under a covered bench. A weathered sign reads, "Shoes speak first." You ask the innkeeper what it means. He says, if a man enters barefoot, he's desperate. If he enters in geta during rain, he's arrogant. If his soles are clean, but his straps are frayed, he lies about where he's been. That's a lot for a couple of rice fibers to communicate. The practice of reading sandals became an informal diagnostic tool. Guards at castle gates were trained not just to check weapons, but to scan footwear, patterns of wear, mud consistency, and even foot odors. Yes, unfortunately, were used to determine social class and recent activity. They didn't call it forensic podiatry, but that's essentially what it was. You recall a tale the cobbler whispered yesterday about a wandering Ronin who posed as a monk to enter a restricted compound. His act was nearly flawless, robe and all, but he wore flat indoor slippers on a muddy day. Caught instantly. Slippers don't lie. As evening falls, you return to your modest inn, your zirai drying on a rack. You realize that for all the noise about swords and scrolls, half of Edo diplomacy started with toes. Every entrance, every mat, every creaky floorboard, negotiated quietly by the sound, smell, and symmetry of straw soles. And tomorrow, you'll step even deeper into that whisper, soft world. Our word count 1080 awaiting. Sion-ti-ni-e ban-by-nai kenti-i-u chat-gpt-o-i-n-i. Section 5, morning slides gently into the streets like warm miso through a ladle. The rain has cleared, leaving behind that glossy, puddle, speckled calm that only exists before a city fully wakes up. You're already moving, sandals brushing against the moist stone, like a broom made of breath. Today, your feet are heading toward the arterial lifeline of Tokugawa, Japan, the T-Kata Road, and the sandals you wear. Oh, they're about to hear things. Stretching over 500 kilometers between Edo and Kyoto, the T-Kata wasn't just a road. It was a ribbon of gossip, intrigue, deals, poetry, petty theft, arranged marriages, broken ones, cart crashes, and the quiet art of walking without falling apart. You blend in with the travelers, pilgrims with bells, merchants with carts, officials with frowns, and messengers, always walking faster than everyone else. You notice them right away. They wear waraji, tightly woven and almost indistinguishable except for one detail: the thong is colored. Not brightly, but just enough. Blue for northern dispatches, red for imperial courier lines, green for merchant consortiums. It's a code, unofficial but widely understood. A courier in red doesn't get questioned. One in blue might be asked for directions. One in green, best ignored unless you're looking for gossip. You fall into pace beside a courier who's reading a note while walking. Her waraji are muddy, but freshly repaired. She doesn't speak at first. Couriers rarely do. They're like sandals with legs, quiet, purposeful, built for wear. Eventually, she asks if your sandals speak well. You nod, confused. She clarifies, if they make noise, people won't talk near you. So that's how information travels, not just by what you carry, but what you wear on your feet. Shoemakers along the Tiuked were a special breed. Their shops doubled as safe houses, gossip points, and sometimes makeshift post offices. The best among them could tell where a traveler came from based solely on the wear pattern of their sandals. More heel, Kyoto. More toe, Edo. Mud on the sides, detoured through Nagoya. A broken strap at the base of the big toe. Probably slipped on a poem in a cone. You stop at one of these cobbler way stations. It's built right into the slope of a hill, half buried in moss. A sign reads, Sandal Mender and Moon Viewer. Poetic, multitasking. Inside, the owner is threading a thong with frightening precision. You ask about the courier code. He shrugs. It changes, keeps things honest. Then he gestures to a pair of sandals hanging from the rafters, thick-soled, with 5 knotted thongs. Those were made for a whisper runner, he says. She delivered scrolls no one was supposed to read. Whisper runners. They were real. Not elite spies, just low-level couriers trusted with messages so sensitive they were told not to memorize them. Their job was to pass along sealed notes, make no eye contact, and keep their sandals from squeaking. One infamous case involved a runner who made it from Osaka to Edo in less than 4 days, rotating between 5 pairs of waraji. His feet bled, but the note got through. The message, a correction to a haiku meant for a provincial governor's birthday scroll. Apparently, it misused a seasonal word. Total disaster. You continue along the Tioked, sandals clicking softly against the bridges and root-ridden passes. In one village, a boy waves at you while dragging a wooden gita behind him on a string like a toy dog. It's an old courier superstition, dragging a shadow sandal to catch stray words and deflect bad luck. Historians still argue whether this was legitimate practice or just childhood mischief that went viral before viral was a thing. At a roadside tea house, you watch a tired merchant remove his sandals with a sigh that feels rehearsed. Inside his zirai are tiny bits of rolled paper. Notes, receipts, even a love poem from his last stop. You ask if it's dangerous to carry messages in shoes. He grins. Only if the sandals are interesting. Boring ones. Perfect hiding spots. Makes sense. No one wants to dig through sweaty straw unless they absolutely have to. As dusk pulls a lavender veil across the landscape, you reach a rest station run by 2 elderly women. They clean and resell worn-out sandals, after soaking them in persimmon water and vinegar. One of them shows you a collection of odd finds discovered inside returned soles, hairpins, coins, snake scales, a tooth. You ask what they do with the messages they find. We rid them, she says plainly, then rewrite them into fiction. Nobody suspects an old gossip story. The teakhead, you realize, was a living network of souls and stories. The waraji you're wearing now might be remembered by someone else tomorrow, retold in part, exaggerated beyond recognition. And while official records focus on treaties, taxes, and uprisings, it's these soft-footed exchanges that really shape the social pulse of an age. You settle beneath a cedar tree near a post town marker, stretching your feet and checking the wear on your Z-Rye. Frayed at the edges, a little damp, but silent, invisible. And maybe that's the secret to diplomacy here. Not thunderous declarations, but the steady murmur of straw and stone, ferrying secrets across centuries. How word count 1087 he awaiting CNTNU bien ananian kintianu chagpt anani. Section 6, you wake to the gentle rustle of bamboo and a rooster who sounds vaguely apologetic. The town is small, but its shoes are loud, at least metaphorically. This is one of the lesser-known stops along the inland road, and yet it has more shoemakers per capita than almost anywhere else in the region. Why? Because here, in this humble hamlet nestled between two hills, no one can quite remember the names of sandal guilds once waged some of the quietest turf wars in recorded history. You walk past two shops directly across from each other. One's banner reads, Fine Step Sandals, since 1690. The other, the original Fine Step Sandals, since 1689. It's not a typo, it's a grudge, and it goes back generations. Guild rivalries in the Edo period weren't fought with fists or lawsuits. No, that would be too exciting. They were fought with storefront window arrangements, decorative knots, and the subtle passive aggression of supply chain sabotage. The sandal guilds were tightly organized. Each town had its own, complete with masters, apprentices, and bylaws that read like very dull poetry. There were rules about how long a sandal must last, how many layers of straw were appropriate, and even how many syllables your shop's name could have if it contained the word cloud. Bureaucracy. Thriving. And yet, beneath all this tedium lurked a fierce pride. One shop might specialize in zirai, with intricate herringbone soles. Another might focus exclusively on waraji designed for walking meditation. To the untrained eye, they looked identical, but if you asked the wrong cobbler for a style associated with their rival, you get a polite nod, a tight smile, and a sandal just slightly off. Balance. Coincidence. Historians still argue. You sit on a crate outside a shop where an old man is threading thongs while humming what sounds like a lullaby. He offers you tea and after a pause leans in. You want to hear the story of the 1811 thread dispute? Of course you do. It began, as all sandal wars do, with an innovation red, dyed thong fiber. One guild claimed they'd invented it to honor a local autumn festival. The others swore it was their idea, tied to a legend about a fox spirit. The disagreement escalated when both shops displayed red, thonged sandals in their front windows. 3 nights later, one window was mysteriously smashed. No witnesses, no charges. But the next morning, every sandal in town had its thong tied backward. A message. From there, it became a war of craftsmanship. Subtle tweaks. Decorative spirals added to the heel. Knots shaped like turtles. One shop introduced the silent step. A sandal so quiet it could embarrass a ninja. The rival responded with whisper soles, made from ultra-fine hemp that felt like walking on regret. Customers took sides. Marriages were strained. A local poet even published a haiku about its stranger in the storm. Which sandal hides the anger? Only silence knows. You finish your tea. The cobbler shows you one last relic. A sandal with a tiny stitch in the shape of a lotus, barely visible. Guild mark, he says. We all had them. Small. Hidden. Just enough to say, this is ours. You ask if the guild's ever reconciled. He shrugs. We use the same straw now, but we still watch each other's knots. You head toward the village square, where an annual sandal fair is being set up. There's a stage for demonstrations, speed weaving, silent stepping. and a judged event known as the balance test. Contestants must walk across a beam in the most awkwardly shaped gita possible. Slow, absurd, and strangely moving. A young girl offers you a pair of sandals to test. You step onto the beam, wobble slightly, then find your center. The sandals aren't identical, one sole slightly thicker than the other. Deliberate? Maybe. A metaphor? Definitely. You make it halfway before slipping, landing softly in a straw pile. The crowd claps anyway. Later, you spot two rival cobblers quietly sharing rice crackers behind their booths. They're not smiling, but they're not glaring either. Just chewing, side by side. You wonder how many years it took to get to that point. The sandals in their stalls are practically indistinguishable now. Styles have merged. Methods have softened. But the pride? Still braided deep into the fiber. As you leave the town, your zira feel lighter. Maybe it's the craftsmanship. Maybe it's the stories. Or maybe it's just nice to walk on ground where the greatest battles were fought in silence, with sandals as the only weapons and windows as the only casualties. On word count 1082 awaiting into awaiting co10 ubn manenais kantai tani chatgpt 1. Section 7. You're halfway up a sloped village path when your left sandal catches on a raised root and you stumble, not dramatically, just enough to mutter something unrepeatable under your breath. That's when you hear it, a throat clearing kind of cough, deliberate, polite, and laced with centuries of judgment. You look up to find a small figure in deep indigo robes standing at the gate of a modest estate. His expression is unreadable, his gaze locked on your feet. You have just committed the ultimate fox pass sandal disarray in the presence of authority. As it happens, you've wandered into a district that once served as the administrative annex for a mid-tier daimyo. Not quite powerful enough to get his own palanquin convoy, but certainly important enough to ruin your week with a letter to your supervisor. And today, you're about to learn what happens when someone messes with a daimyo's heel. It started, as the locals will tell you, with an innocent delivery. A visiting craftsman had been summoned to produce a special pair of ziri for the daimyo himself. Something ceremonial but comfortable, stately but practical. The craftsman, a sandal artisan from far-off Yamaguchi, had a stellar reputation. He arrived, took the daimyo's foot measurements by hand, a deeply personal act, and returned 2 days later with the finished pair. They were perfect. Almost. Except for one issue, the left sandal was half a finger too tight, barely perceptible. But the daimyo noticed immediately. He didn't raise his voice. He simply removed the sandals, placed them side by side, and asked his attendants to return these to the ground from which they came. The sandals were buried. The craftsman was dismissed. Quietly. Politely. Utterly. Historians still argue whether this sandal fox pass actually caused the minor diplomatic freeze that followed. Some say the daimyo cancelled all appointments for the next month out of embarrassment. Others claim it was a power play, an excuse to delay a political marriage negotiation. Whatever the case, the message was clear: sandals are serious business. You sit near a carved stone bench where local children are reenacting the sandal rejection incident, using dolls made of corn husks. One child yells, "I reject this heel!" and dramatically throws the doll into a puddle. Applause follows. The culture has not forgotten. You wander into the district's old shoemaker's quarter, now mostly abandoned. Ivy covers the doorframes. One workshop is still intact, its sign barely legible, "Foot and Honor." Inside, faded sketches line the walls. Sandal silhouettes annotated with notes like, "Too proud," "Good for rainy days," and slight heel tilt, confident but humble. You can't tell if it's sincere or satirical, probably both. A brittle scroll on the desk details preferred sandal designs by rank. Apparently, daimyo liked their thongs broad and soft. Samurai preferred tighter fits for faster draw speed, and temple officials requested soles that made a satisfying but respectful tapping sound. Sound mattered. A squeaky thong. Disrespectful. A slap that echoed too loudly? Arrogant. No wonder so many artisans went gray early. You step outside and run into a woman polishing a shoe display. She tells you her great-great-grandfather was a sandal courier for the regional court. One day, he accidentally delivered the wrong pair to the wrong guest. Both sandals were right-footed. The guest tripped and spilled his ink scroll. That scroll contained trade negotiations with a rival province. The result? 6 months of diplomatic silence. One scroll. 2 right shoes. Endless fallout. She smiles, not quite proudly. We have the scroll framed, she says. You thank her and continue on, reflecting on how something as mundane as a misfitted heel could tip a balance, even if only for a moment. It's not always about blood or coin. Sometimes it's about subtle messages, the kind sent through a fraction of an inch too snug. As you reach the edge of the district, you spot a shrine built in honor of the foot that waits. It's small, humble, and dedicated to patience in footwear. A virtue more honored than you'd expect. Visitors leave tiny straw sandals at the base, each one a prayer for understanding, forgiveness, or just more comfortable walking. You take a breath, adjust your ziri, this time perfectly aligned, and step forward with the knowledge that sometimes diplomacy comes down to the quietest discomfort, and whether or not you have the grace to hide it. Word count 1, yo 7 tuhi awaiting, CRTINU, BMININI, TANTINUE chat GPT Y9A section, 8 the path you follow now curls through an old merchant quarter, where the scent of dried persimmons and wood smoke lingers like an old friend who never quite leaves. This is where you begin to notice a strange detail, one you'd missed until now. It's not the sandals themselves, but the bottoms, the soles. Not just worn, but patterned, intentional, subtle, and somehow speaking. You pause outside a sandal stall with a curtained entrance and a barely legible sign. Footprint specialists. Inside, the shop is low-ceilinged and lit with the faint flicker of oil lamps. Every wall is lined with pairs of zirai and waraji, but flipped over, displayed sole up. You step inside the shopkeeper, a thin, stooped man with eyebrows like accidental calligraphy, greets you with a slight bow and an open palm. Let your foot speak, he says. Unsure if this is literal or metaphysical, you remove one sandal and hand it to him. He turns it slowly, examining the sole like it's a confession. Eh, he murmurs, tracing a faint spiral in the weave. You walk with consideration. But you've recently lied? Excuse me? He smiles. Not to me. But your heel hesitated before your toe stepped. Classic pattern of concealed hesitation. I see it often in merchants returning from failed negotiations. You blink. This man is reading you like a sandal-shaped tarot deck. And you're hooked. He goes on to explain the language of souls, an old, mostly forgotten tradition among higher-end shoemakers, spies, and those who trafficked in very quiet messages. Patterns weren't just aesthetic. They were communicative. A tight coil near the heel indicates cautious intent. A double, braided edge signaled loyalty to a particular family crest. Certain diagonal weaves were rumored to mean message enclosed, especially when paired with specific heel knots. The shopkeeper shows you a pair from the 1780s. The soles have an intricate wave motif woven in. This pair, he says, was worn by a tea courier during the Satsuma Izumo whisper talks. Everyone remembers the tea. No one remembers the shoes, but they carried just as much weight. Historians still argue whether messages were ever literally woven into soles, or whether this was more symbolic. Some accounts claim straw strands were dyed with crushed ink and laid out to form hidden kanji, like invisible signatures worn into the earth one step at a time. Others believe this was wishful thinking, romanticized by later generations, desperate to find espionage in every frayed edge. But then, the shopkeeper pulls out his prized possession, a preserved waraji with a heel so tightly braided it resembles a clenched fist. From the silent protest march of 1824, he says, "Every marcher wore these. No banners, just this soul." You sit with that for a moment. Protest, diplomacy, and loyalty. all expressed in the most forgettable part of the outfit. A message not meant to be read by the eye, but felt in the walk. Later, you pass a group of children drawing patterns in the dirt with sticks. One sketches a sandal sole with exaggerated ridges. Another copies it, but in reverse. It's a game, but it's also more. They're mimicking the visual language passed down from their grandparents. It's how kids used to send messages between families. Left sole to yes, right sole to no. Crosshatched hate meet me near the river. A playful code built from footsteps. You find a roadside sign near a stone bridge. It bears an etched warning. Wearing clan soles in wrong village may invite dishonor. Not an idle threat. There are stories of travelers being denied entry, or worse, because their sandal patterns resembled rival symbols. One man, a traveling ink seller, reportedly had to burn his shoes and walk barefoot through an entire town just to prove neutrality. The system wasn't foolproof. Imposters sometimes copied patterns, leading to a brief but chaotic period known in local records as the Soul Confusion. Shoemakers were blamed, arrests were made, new regulations demanded soles be aesthetic only. Naturally, people found ways around that too. You end your walk at a quiet inn built beside a stream. The hostess notices your sandals and raises an eyebrow. Walked far, she says, but not yet deeply. You ask what she means, and she lifts her foot to show you a delicate swirl stitched into her indoor slipper. Message to my daughter, she says. She'll see it when she inherits them, not before. That night, as you remove your zerai and place them side by side, you find yourself staring at the soles. What have they said without your knowing? What have they carried besides you? The language of souls is like a whisper you only hear in hindsight, not loud, not written, just felt. Step by quiet step. How word count. 1084. Awaiting. Siontiani Binoanani Kantiainu GPONI Section 9. The stream beside the inn chuckles softly as you wake. Its gentle rhythm blending with the scratch of a broom sweeping a wooden walkway. Morning in this part of Japan feels thinner somehow. Like the air has fewer secrets, but isn't ready to give up the ones it has. You stretch, retrieve your sandals, and step outside to find a cluster of townsfolk gathered near a gate marked by unfamiliar lettering. The language, Dutch. The place, Nagasaki. This is where the rules change. You're in Dejima now. A fan-shaped artificial island, built to house and contain the Dutch traders allowed to do business with isolationist Japan during the Edo period. Foreigners weren't exactly welcome. They were tolerated, scrutinized, managed, and nothing illustrated that odd diplomacy better than what they wore on their feet. At the checkpoint, you're stopped by a stoic guard who glances down at your sandals before waving you through. A second guard, younger and slightly more curious, mutters to his partner, too quiet to be foreign. You smirk. You've finally found a use for silent souls. Inside, the streets are cobbled in an orderly, almost obsessive grid, very unlike the winding lanes you've gotten used to. You watch as a Dutch trader, tall, red-faced, sweating profusely, struggles to squeeze his boots into the designated compliant sandals. Yes, you heard that right. To avoid excessive foreign disturbance, all Dutch visitors were required to wear approved footwear when walking through Japanese quarters. Essentially, stiff-soled, regulated slippers that muffled their steps and, symbolically, their presence. The trader curses quietly. His boots, black leather and buckled, clearly do not appreciate being imprisoned by sandals meant for feet half his size. Still, rules are rules. The slippers are awkwardly strapped on, and he's finally allowed to proceed, shuffling with the elegance of a goose on a frozen pond. You speak with a local sandal maker stationed near the compliance checkpoint. She's younger than most, hair tied back with a bright ribbon, and quick to laugh. She tells you how foreign footwear often confuse the townsfolk, not just because of its size or shape, but because of its sounds. Boots thudded, heels clicked, soles clapped. In a culture built on silence, these noises were declarations of chaos. They walk like they want to be found, she says, amused. As if the ground owes them an answer. That's why she, along with a handful of other cobblers, was contracted to design intermediary sandals, soles thick enough to muffle foreign noise, straps wide enough to fit the alien anatomy, and just enough cultural camouflage to pass at a glance. She calls it diplomatic footwear. The term is half joke, half fact. One preserved pair, she shows you, has tiny ink marks inside the heel. Evidence that someone once tried to smuggle a letter through Dejima. Not unheard of. Foreigners had limited access to the rest of Japan, but they were deeply curious. Some tried to bribe couriers. Others sent coded messages using sandal sole patterns learned from their Japanese hosts. Most failed. One succeeded. Historians still argue which message caused the brief trade freeze of 1791, but the smuggled sandal is in a museum now, labeled simply, communication device. You walk further into Dejima, noticing how out of place even the tiniest things seem. Street lanterns shaped oddly, chimneys too high, doors that open the wrong way. But the shoes? The shoes always give it away. Inside a Dutch official's quarters, you see a row of mismatched footwear lined up by the entrance, European leather boots, beside Japanese slippers, and one rather distressed pair of clogs with an apologetic note tucked under the strap. Please do not laugh. It says in shaky kanji. It's not just the foreigners who adapted. Japanese intermediaries, interpreters, translators, liaisons, often wore hybrid footwear, zuri soles with boot, like uppers, or Geta platforms modified for height to maintain eye level with taller Europeans. It wasn't fashion. It was negotiation, stitched together and worn into the dirt. You overhear a conversation between two officials, one Japanese, one Dutch. They're debating trade quotas, but it's the footwear that catches your eye. The Japanese official adjusts his sandal mid-sentence. A gesture of boredom or control, you can't tell. The Dutchman shifts uncomfortably in his compliance pair. A moment passes. The conversation cools. Nothing is resolved, but both men know the shoes are part of the tension. Later, at a corner tea stall, you sip a warm barley drink and ask the vendor about foreign shoes. She laughs softly. We learn to predict their moods, she says. Hard steps, angry, dragging feet, homesick. Jumping down from boats and boots, always meant someone new was about to make trouble. As night falls, you return to your inn, passing a small shrine dedicated not to a god, but to understanding across souls. Someone's left a pair of old Dutch boots beside it, muddy, cracked, but carefully placed. Next to them, a pair of Japanese slippers, frayed but folded with precision, an offering, a wish, maybe even an apology. You step quietly inside, remove your ziri, and place them sole to sole. In this strange dance of cultures and customs, sometimes diplomacy isn't about what you say. It's about how softly you walk through someone else's world. Her word count 1088 awaiting. Si otaini binin aini kuraini chaji pt waineni. Section 10. The wind carries the scent of burning pine and ink as you pass along a forest path outside the city. You're no longer in the cramped political hush of Dejima or the bustling heel thumps of the Tuked. This place feels older, less documented, woven with myth more than rule. And right now, you're following a trail to an old story passed around like a sandal half, mended, told in murmurs and stifled giggles. It's about a love letter hidden in a sandal heel, and the chaos it left behind. You arrive at a small workshop on the edge of a temple town, its sliding door ajar, revealing rows of shoes hanging like drying fruit. The cobbler here, an older woman with a half smile and all knowing eyes, nods when you mention the story. Ah, she says, the sandal that almost married a poet. You settle in to hear the tale. It starts with a young woman named Nayao, daughter of a respected local governor. Bright, sharp-tongued, and expected to marry into another politically advantageous family. Her heart, however, belonged to a boy named Ren, quiet, ink-stained, and employed as an apprentice shoemaker. Obviously, the pair exchanged glances over market stalls, folded notes under rice sacks, and eventually, their secret reached a crisis. The governor had arranged her marriage. Ren, in a stroke of bold desperation, or nar, v romanticism, decided to write Nio one final letter, confessing everything, pleading for a midnight escape. But how to deliver it without suspicion? Enter the sandal. Ren wove the letter into the heel of a zero-ri, carefully braided into the third layer of straw. From the outside, it looked perfectly ordinary. He enlisted a courier friend to deliver the pair to Nio under the guise of a gift from the temple shoemaker. Simple, clever, and, of course, completely doomed, because the courier's route passed through the garden of Nio's betrothed. And the betrothed's sister, Nosi, suspicious and possessed of remarkable sandal instincts, noticed the unusual heel. She pulled the sandal apart, found the letter, and all delicacy promptly dissolved in a family scandal. The wedding was postponed. Ren was banned from temple grounds. Now was sent to stay with distant relatives. But the story didn't end there. It leaked. Softly at first, then widely, like a tea stain on handmade parchment. The governor, embarrassed by the spectacle, chose to spin the story differently. He claimed it was all part of a morality tale, a test of integrity in straw form. But people weren't fooled. The cobbler shows you a replica of the sandal, recreated from an old sketch. The heel is slightly thicker. The weave subtly asks you. She smiles. They say it still smells faintly of ink. Historians still argue whether the original letter survived. Some believe it was destroyed by the sister in a fit of protective rage. Others suggest it was returned to Ren, anonymously decades later, pressed into the pages of a poetry anthology he never finished. Either way, the story entered folklore. And like all good stories, it inspired copycats. Soon, love-struck youths across the region began hiding messages in souls. Some were harmless poems, declarations, requests to meet beneath the plum trees. Others less so, confessions, threats, even marriage proposals. One cobbler was arrested for creating emotionally charged footwear. An actual phrase from the local magistrate's report. The trend eventually earned a nickname, Koizar-ri, or love sandals, and shoemakers began to specialize in them. Special heels, ink-resistant inner layers, small carvings to help the recipient know where to look. Of course, most recipients never noticed. Dozens of messages walked for miles, unread, worn into the ground, or soaked in puddles. There's a kind of poetry in that. You walk past a courtyard where elderly women are teaching children how to braid sandal soles. One girl asks if she can hide a note inside. Her grandmother shrugs. If it's a good note, yes. If it's a complaint, keep it to yourself. The shoemakers who crafted these secret messages began to develop their own code. A subtle mark on the sole that meant something hidden here. But that, too, invited trouble. A local constable once pulled apart every sandal in a temple's entryway after discovering one such mark, only to find a letter from a child to her cat. The constable retired shortly afterward, muttering about feline conspiracies. You pause at a shrine nestled between trees. Hanging from the branches are dozens of tiny zerai, each with a red string tied through the thong. Love prayers. Some are scribbled on paper and tucked inside. Others are just for show, symbols of hopes too shy for ink. You leave a blank one. No message. Just the act. As night thickens around you, your feet feel the weight of steps taken by others. Some rushed with romantic panic, others heavy with heartbreak, all stitched quietly into the earth. The wind rustles the leaves, and you wonder how many truths have been carried not by voice or scroll, but by sandals walking alone, whispering secrets no one will ever fully hear. Our word count 1088A. Awaiting. Siotinin. Bienu ani. Kiani ChatGPT 1 Section 11. The air this morning is crisp, the sky a soft canvas smeared with barely their clouds, and the pebbled path before you leads uphill toward what remains of a once imperial residence. Not a grand castle, no towering pagodas or gleaming gold leaf, just a modest wooden complex tucked into a grove of cedar trees. This was one of the Shigun satellite retreats, a place for quiet contemplation, chess games that lasted days, and the occasional ceremonial plum tasting. And today, it's the scene of one of history's most overlooked, most delicately bungled political mishaps. The day the Shigun lost a slipper. Now, before you scoff, understand this wasn't just any slipper. This was an indoor court Z-Rai, soft, custom, stitched, lined with silk, embroidered with the Tokugawa crest, and stored in a cedarwood box blessed by monks and polished by someone whose entire job was literally soul warden. It wasn't meant to be worn often, just for specific rituals, which is precisely why the loss was so catastrophic. You enter the former servants' quarters, where faded scrolls and yellowed wooden plaques list titles so specific they sound made up. Chief Arrangement Officer of Guest Socks. Right? Side sandal repositioning assistant. But these were real. In an environment where a misaligned heel could spark offense, there were no small jobs. The tale begins during a midwinter banquet. Snow was falling in polite, symmetrical flakes. Inside, the Shigun was being dressed by his attendants. Every layer folded, every sash tied, every strand of hair combed with a comb made from sacred turtle shell. And then, just before he was to step out onto the ceremonial tatami walkway, someone noticed only one slipper. Panic. At first, quiet panic. The head attendant calmly asked a junior servant if he had seen the pair. The servant paled, bowed, and vanished into the corridor like a dropped curtain. What followed was a frantic, hushed search of the estate. No shouting, just the soft stampede of slippered feet and the barely audible whispers of absolute dread. The missing Zhao Ri was nowhere. Replacements were discussed, but quickly dismissed. The pair had been commissioned during the previous Gun's final year. Replacements would be seen as disrespectful to his memory, so the staff did what bureaucracies always do. When in doubt, they covered it up. A fake pair was retrieved, close in appearance, but noticeably lighter, and with a slightly different thong pattern. They hoped the Shogun wouldn't notice. He did. Historians still argue what happened in the exact moment he slid his foot into the decoy. Some say he paused, looked around, and said nothing. Others believe he quietly muttered, "This is not mine," before proceeding with the ceremony. Either way, he didn't make a scene. But he also didn't forget. That evening, the entire sandal department was rotated. Not fired, just rotated. This meant new assignments, changed quarters, some demotions, and one unfortunate soul reassigned to rice husk disposal on a small island in Lake Biwa. No one ever found the original slipper, or so the official records claim. You're told by the estate's current caretaker, an elderly man who speaks like he's describing weather from another lifetime, that an old servant once confessed to finding the slipper weeks later lodged between two tatami boards. She left it there, out of fear, perhaps, or superstition. Or maybe she understood something everyone else didn't. Shoes, after all, carried weight beyond function. In a world built on protocol, to lose a slipper wasn't just carelessness, it was disruption, disrespect, possibly even omen. You walk through the hallway where the search supposedly began. The floor creaks slightly underfoot. Above the doorframe hangs a wooden charm, probably intended to ward off bad luck or misplaced footwear. Someone has etched a small Z-Rai into the corner. You smile. Further into the estate, you see a display, a pair of indoor Z-Ri under glass, said to be from the era in question. The left is slightly darker than the right. You ask the caretaker if these are the originals. He leans in and says, "That depends on how much you believe in good stories." In a side room, you find a set of instructions pinned to the wall, written in delicate brushstrokes. Proper handling of ceremonial slippers, 10 guidelines. They include rules like avoid direct pointing with sandal, maintain equal shine, and store souls to solitude when resting. You're not sure what that last one means. No one is. Outside, a small garden circles a stone bench, shaped like a sandal sole. The groundskeepers swear it's coincidence. You sit, watching the wind stir the bamboo. Somewhere out there, perhaps still hidden in the floorboards or eaten by time, rests the slipper that once shuffled an entire administrative department like cards in a serious game. You stand, adjust your own zirai, both accounted for, a perfectly symmetrical, and leave the estate quietly. Because the lesson, as always, is this: sometimes it's not the step that causes the ripple. Shword Kanduand 087 Fia waiting, Siontiana U. Bilanayan Kyodidayani Chat GPT Wanengai. Section 12. You wander back toward the city outskirts, where the streets twist tighter, and the shops are stitched together like an old patchwork robe. This is the artisan's quarter, the kind of place where windows are always open, tools rest mid-motion, and time forgets to hurry. Here, shoemakers worked not only with straw and fiber, but with meaning. And sometimes, meaning was the message. You step into a workshop smaller than your last in-room. Inside, an old man is bent over a sandal frame, his fingers tracing lines that look more decorative than functional. At first glance, it seems he's just adding flair, spirals, loops, small embroidered patterns along the thong strap. But as you watch, you realize something else he's coding. He glances up. "You see art?" he says, but the magistrate sees a flower. He chuckles. "Both of you are wrong. You've stumbled into one of Edo, Japan's quietest rebellions, the era of ornamental camouflage. When censorship tightened in the 1830s, artisans, shoemakers included, began encoding subtle forms of protest in their work. For sandal makers, this meant decorative elements that, on closer inspection, whispered messages of resistance, hope, or pure petty defiance. Take the dewdrop spiral, a seemingly innocent design woven near the heel. It looks like a raindrop, but when placed off-center and paired with a triple thong loop, it was known among certain guild members to mean harvests lie. The storehouses are not empty. A direct jab at inflated rice taxes. The crane knot design used on waraji thongs could symbolize longevity, but when tied with an extra twist and dyed with persimmon bark, it meant we remember what was taken. The symbolism was often too abstract for censors, who preferred things they could easily ban, like seditious scrolls or literal shouting. Historians still argue whether this ornamental code was widespread or limited to a few radical shops. But enough examples survive, preserved in personal collections and temple storerooms, to suggest that these messages were real and powerful. The shoemaker beckons you closer and shows you a sandal designed for a festival dancer. The straps are colorful, braided with blue and gold threads, but along the edge of the sole, he's woven a faint border pattern, repeating rectangles that, if read top to bottom, spell a single kanji: truth. It's beautiful and entirely deniable. You leave the shop and pass a vendor selling festival sandals, many of them bearing similar motifs. You ask one buyer if he knows the meaning. He shrugs. "My grandmother said it brings luck." Maybe also says don't trust the rice collector. Then he laughs. "Either way, I don't slip." In one town, you hear of a cobbler who embedded tiny wooden charms into sandal heels, so small they rattled softly as you walked. To most, it was just craftsmanship. But in truth, each charm was carved with a single character, and together they spelled out lines from banned poems. When authorities caught on, the cobbler switched to using knot count instead of script. One sandal with 9 knots. That meant hope. 2 thongs with 13 loops each. Forgive, but remember. You visit a small museum near the river, where protest sandals are displayed behind rice paper screens. A note beside them reads, "Words walk when mouths could not." One pair, in particular, is famous, worn by a shrine caretaker during the brief Satsuma rebellion. The soles feature an elaborate, branching pattern. It looks like a vine, or maybe a map. No one's cracked the full meaning, but scholars suspect it's a symbolic layout of secret meeting places. You sit outside the museum on a bench shaped like a database, thinking about the risks. To you, the messages are quiet and clever. But at the time, Even whispering dissent could lead to exile, or worse. These shoemakers weren't trying to lead revolts. They were threading resistance into the very dust of daily life. Each pair walked their truth, step by silent step. As you wander back through the market, you see newer shoes mimicking old designs. The patterns remain, but the meanings faded, forgotten. A sandal once meant, "We suffer in silence," now marketed as the Serenity Weave. But maybe that's part of the magic. Resistance that outlives its reason, symbols recycled into peace. Before you return to your inn, you buy a pair of replica zirai with a simple knot pattern. 4 loops, 1 twist. You don't know what it means, if anything. But the soles feel honest. They carry history in their silence. And as you walk through the cobbled street, soft thuds echo behind you like a poem no one dares recite, embroidered not in ink, but in soul and string. Your word count 108 ahi awaiting. Siontiinu binani kayainu check GPT. YNNI section 13. A dense fog has rolled in by the time you reach Kanazawa. The city, perched between mountain mist and coastal breeze, feels like it's holding its breath. Even the usual clatter of sandals on stone is subdued, muffled by wet air and old secrets. You pass through the wooden gates of an estate, once owned by a minor clan, with a major flair for subtlety, and as you step onto the inner walkways, you hear it nothing. Not silence exactly. Silence would be too loud. This is something deeper. The corridors of the manor are lined with tatami, but beneath the edges, soft woven mats hum beneath the soles of your feet. They don't squeak or shift, they whisper. The servant guiding you pauses. "We call them the whispering mats," she says, almost shyly. They were installed by the third lord. Supposedly, they let him hear conversations from across the manor. You glance down at the reed flooring, trying to imagine how. Some say they were tensioned to create specific creaks when walked on, each pitch distinct to a location. Others believe that sound would travel through the mat's layered weaves, like how a string and cup phone might carry a voice. Historians still argue whether the mats truly functioned this way, or if it's all local legend, amplified by too many rainy afternoons. But the shoemakers of Kanazawa, they believed. This city's sandal artisans were renowned not for the shoes themselves, but for how the shoes behaved on specific surfaces. Their work was tailored to match the material grain of a floor, the warp and weft of the tatami, even the sound reflection of adjacent chambers. When a lord needed privacy, he wore silent soles. When he wanted a presence announced, slightly roughened thongs. Each visitor's footwear was subtly altered by house staff to send cues to anyone listening. You walk deeper into the estate, where a narrow hallway leads toward what once was the war chamber. It's a plain room. No banners, no dramatic relics, just a low table and an ink-stained map of the domain, still faintly visible beneath layers of protective rice paper. According to the caretaker, decisions were made here not with grand speeches or loud declarations, but with pacing. Literally, the lord would walk back and forth on whispering mats, letting his steps announce his mood and position to those waiting behind the shoji screens. A soft scuff, agreement. A firm stamp, dissent. A long pause, doubt. This language of footsteps required the perfect soles. Not too soft, or the message was muddled. Not too loud, or it seemed theatrical. Sandal makers would travel from the artisan quarter to the estate before any major negotiation, bringing new soles tuned to that specific tatami corridor. The entire floor, in a sense, became a speaker, and the sandals, the stylus. In one preserved scroll, a court recorder wrote, "The Lord gave no words today, but 3 pauses and a pivot. We must delay the treaty." It's comical until you realize how much power was wrapped in those 12 paces. You walk the hallway yourself, testing your zirai on the boards. They make the faintest talk sound, muted and even. But as you near the war chamber's entrance, the tone changes slightly. The floorboards under the mat dip by a hair's width, altering the pressure. Your steps gain a tiny echo. It's like the building is replying in breathless tones. In a side room, once used by attendants, you find sandals lined up on a shelf, each pair labeled with a name and a role: messenger, record keeper, herbalist. The soles vary wildly, some thick and nearly soundless, others notched, perhaps to announce urgency. A faded diary from a chambermaid sits beside them. One entry reads, "The Lord wore his storm soles today. We will prepare for rejection." Her notes track dozens of similar correlations. Sandals as indicators of mood, intention, or even deception. One entry describes a guest who deliberately wore silent shoes on a day of expected confrontation. "He seeks advantage," she wrote, by misrepresenting tone. It wasn't just internal strategy. Visitors to the estate were watched, analyzed, evaluated, all by their feet. Shoemakers in Kanazawa knew this and began adding soul signals to soles, subtle frictions that might slightly alter stride, or patterns that looked purely aesthetic but created recognizable tapping rhythms. It's not far-fetched. Today, we recognize people by the sound of their footsteps in hallways. Back then, it was elevated to a diplomatic tool. Outside, you pass a training courtyard where young apprentices once practiced walking messages. A game turned discipline where one student had to convey emotion using only sandals and movement. You try it now, striding across the flagstones, adjusting your pace, pressing harder into your heels, then softening into a quiet shuffle. You realize it does say something, even if no one's listening. As the sun fades and fog returns, you exit the estate and glance back at its gently curving roofline. The shoemakers of Kanazawa left no manifestos, no great treatises. Just sandals, soles, and rooms that still remember how to listen. You walk on. Hairword count. 1085 awaiting Ciota NEU BN Anta NE ChatGPT YNE section 14 by now. The scent of straw and old wood clings to you like an extra layer of clothing. You're used to the rhythm of your own footsteps. The way your zebra bend and respond to the road's texture. How the thong hums softly between your toes with every step. It's been a quiet journey, but not a lonely one. Each town, each workshop, each hidden corner of Edo-Era Japan has left a print. And now, you arrive at a modest home where one more story waits, stitched into the seams of memory. It's the outskirts of a sleepy farming village. The house, if you can call it that, is little more than a tiled roof held aloft by determination and habit. An elderly man waves you in. He introduces himself simply, Kenta, third-generation cobbler, eighth-generation shoemaker by blood. The family stopped making shoes 2 generations ago, he says, but the soles kept showing up. You step inside, where old sandal frames hang from hooks like sleeping birds. Scrolls of patterns are stored in bamboo tubes. A cracked inkstone rests on the table beside a pair of unfinished ziri, left half, braided as if someone meant to finish them just after tea. Kenta tells you he never learned the craft. His father wouldn't teach him. He said the times had changed. That nobody needed straw anymore, just rubber and glue. But I still remember the smells, the way he turned each twist of hemp like it mattered. He pulls down a box. Inside he sandals, dozens of them. Worn, repaired, mismatched, some clearly not even finished. These, he says, are what he didn't throw away. One pair is especially strange. Gaeta, yes. But the base is irregular, tilted slightly, as if the wearer had one leg just a bit shorter than the other. Carved into the side is a tiny character. Endure. These, Kenta whispers, belong to my great-grandmother. She was a message runner during the famine. Not official. She carried no documents. Just words, spoken, memorized, passed along. It's easy to forget how oral tradition and physical endurance kept entire regions connected. When writing was censored or roads were closed, shoemakers like his great-grandmother walked villages that had no post, no runners. She pretended to sell sandals, but actually delivered verbal news. Grain stores, births, marriages, troop movements. Her shoes weren't just shoes. They were mnemonic devices. Braided with knots corresponding to syllables, scents, or pauses in her mental script. an entire intelligence network disguised as poor foot support. You lift another sandal, stiff-creased, almost fossil, like this one. Kenta says, my grandfather found buried in the garden after the war. Wrapped in oilcloth. He said it must have meant something. Maybe a message. Maybe a goodbye. The family never figured it out. They debated whether to keep it displayed or buried again. In the end, it lived in a drawer for 50 years, wrapped in silk, unremarked upon. But that drawer, he says, it always made the room feel watched. Historians still argue about how much private resistance occurred through everyday items like footwear. Some say it's romanticism layered over coincidence. Others insist the patterns are too consistent to ignore. Kenna shrugs. Maybe my ancestors were geniuses. Or maybe they just had tired feet. You ask if he ever wore the sandals himself. He shakes his head. They're not mine to wear. I just keep them. That's enough. As night deepens, Kenta brews a final pot of tea. You sip, listening to the wind rustle through bamboo like the brush of straw soles against stone. He shows you one last item. A child's sandal, tiny, barely the length of your palm. Made for a daughter we never met, he says. War took that story, but we kept the sandal. It helps the silence mean something. You feel the weight of it, not grief exactly, but the echo of a life that passed on only in fiber and form. The sandal doesn't cry out. It doesn't tell its tale in full. It just exists. Proof of someone's care, someone's intention, someone's presence. Before you leave, Kenta offers you a gift. Not one of the family heirlooms, but a new pair, freshly braided, simple, the kind of Z-ray no one will ever put in a museum. These are for walking forward, he says, but remember to listen behind you. You bow, take the sandals, and step out into the cool evening, knowing you carry more than just your weight now. You carry the quiet trait of lives, braided into history, stories whispered from soul to soul across generations. And though no one else may notice, your steps are just a little softer. Her word count, 108585 awaiting, Siorani Ubu, Men Anane Kanayu ChatGPT Okanane, Section 15. You leave the village just as dawn breaks behind the hills, light filtering through clouds like it's tiptoeing in on padded soles. The road is narrow now, less traveled. Your new Z-Rai, Kenta's gift, creaks softly as you walk, their fibers still stiff with youth. Each step feels both present and backward facing, like you're echoing through someone else's memory. Your path winds through cedar groves and over stone bridges so worn their names have faded from history. But there's one last stop ahead, a remote shrine said to be built by sandal makers, though no one remembers exactly when. It appears gradually, like a shadow forming in the mist. A simple wooden gate, a thatched roof, and hanging from its beams, hundreds of tiny Z-ray offerings, sun-bleached, frayed, some barely clinging by their thongs. No priests, no incense, just a guest book under a lacquered rock and a sign that reads, "Leave what you carried, take only breath." You sit on the steps. In your satchel, you find the first pair of sandals from your journey. Now bent, dirt-stained, and lovingly wrecked. You set them beside the others, sole to sole, thumb forward, like the old cobbler taught you. They've walked temples and tea houses, muddy roads and marble thresholds. They've learned to whisper. It's a quiet moment, sacred not in the religious sense, but in that rare, full breath kind of way. You reflect on where you've been, not just in steps, but in stories. You remember the whispered tension of the guilds, fighting turf battles in decorative knots. The rice straw tariffs, the diplomat humiliated by a wrong size sandal, the hidden heel messages and the rhythmic footsteps that spoke in place of words. The foreign traders trying to soften their noise, and the love letter that almost rewrote two lives, tucked into a soul no one was meant to open. Historians still argue whether shoemakers truly shaped anything grand in the scheme of things, whether their quiet diplomacy really bent policy or merely wove around it like vines on stone. But you've seen enough to know the truth doesn't always leave ink behind. Sometimes, It leaves rope fibers, heel marks, and the smell of straw after rain. You stand, feet flexing in your fresh sandals. They've softened slightly, learning your walk. You take the trail upward, the shrine fading behind you. Trees part, revealing the last crest, and from here, the valley stretches like an old map unrolled across time. Villages you passed through flicker below, rooftops catching light. Someone is stepping into their shop. Somewhere, a sandal is being tied with extra care. You walk on, each step quieter than the last, until even your breathing aligns with the soft hush of the forest. And at last, it's time to sleep. Now let your breath slow. Feel your chest rise and fall, just like the hills you've wandered through tonight. Let the rustle of straw soles and the creak of ancient floors melt into the background. The stories, like the sandals, have done their walking. The quiet diplomacy of Edo-Era Shoemakers wasn't about loud change or sharp turns. It was about listening, about knowing when to speak through softness, about finding meaning in patterns, rhythms, textures, and trusting that every step you take carries more than just your weight. You've seen the maps that never got drawn, read the letters no one wrote, and felt the truths laced quietly into thongs and soles. This world didn't change through fanfare. It shifted gently underfoot. So wherever you are now, whether curled beneath a blanket or just closing your eyes, let those steps trail off into dreams. Picture a soft path wending into a cedar grove. Picture sandals drying on a porch, forgotten but content. Picture a single pair left on a shrine step, still carrying the warmth of a day well walked. Let your muscles soften. Let your thoughts unravel like the end of a well-worn strap. There's nothing more to fix. Nothing more to remember. Just the hush of history in motion, and the stillness waiting after.